So I am making this video for a specific client. I'm going to leave the name and the location out and their realtor, but it's something that I want to share with everyone because it's pretty easy to find yourself into this predicament where you're between a rock and a hard place on this front. It's specifically about using your VA loan when the house has some wood rot or deficiencies of some sort. First of all, when you're going in to use your VA loan, if it's just going to be a traditional VA loan and not a rehab approach, you're going to need for the wood to be in good condition, the windows, the doors, the roof, and all of the living spaces to be livable. No mold, no water leaks, no issues with the flooring. Um, and definitely no issues with the structure when it comes to like foundational problems where you have like a corner of the house sinking or whatever. In this particular case, we have some wood rot or wood conditions. How about we'll just say conditions of the wood that drew the attention from the appraiser. So usually we have a wood destroying pest and organism inspection done by a licensed termite company. And in this case, it sounds like this termite company signed off on it, like everything's okay. There's no active anything going on. Or they said that they can make the corrective actions and it is what it is. Now, in this case, the appraiser came through and he marked down some of the conditions of the wood that it needs to be corrected. Now, when an appraiser puts a condition on the appraisal, it means that he appraises the property for this value at this date with these conditions, right? So what they're essentially saying on this one is go in and replace the wood or install the wood, whatever the case is in these scenario. That needs to be done prior to close of escrow. And where we can identify that we had where the rock and the hard place. So the rock is the inspection from the appraiser and him placing the conditions on the property. Now, had the wood destroying inspection not called it out, it doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be fixed, right? But if the wood destroying organism people would have called it out, then it would have been a condition for the termite clearance, which may have or may not have been negotiated already in the terms of the offer. But if it wasn't, it's the same as the scenario we're in, because this buyer went in and on their offer, they asked for concessions from the seller, which is the seller paying towards their closing costs and or debts. And that made it to where they essentially agreed to take the house in as is condition because you're giving us this money back for the closing costs, which keeps the money in my pocket, which means that if there is anything to be fixed, I'll fix it after closing. But in this scenario, because it's a condition from the appraiser, it has to be corrected now. There is a way, but it's a very slim chance, a way to argue with the appraiser. In order to do so, you're going to need time from the seller, which is going to be frustrating for the seller, and they don't have to award you that time. So really the fastest and most streamlined way forward here is to have the buyer invest in whatever it's going to take to get those conditions met. So have a contractor come out, give you some bids, and then pull the trigger on one of them doing the work. In this scenario, the house is still belonging to the seller, so you need the seller's permission to do so. The seller does have a vote, so I would suggest having more than one quote. That way, the seller, if he doesn't like the first company, you have a backup company to go with, because the seller's not really going to argue with you on how much it's going to cost to get it fixed. His argument will be, well, if I have somebody come in and do shoddy work on my house and then the buyer still doesn't perform, now I'm stuck with this shoddy work done by this company. So they still do have the power of that vote. It's a very it's a very small margin that you've got to travel in this case. My suggestion would be to determine whether you want to risk it or not, because the other thing that can happen is that you invest in fixing this wood issues in the house, and then for some reason the deal doesn't pan out overall. In this exact scenario, I talked with the lender. The lender sounds like he's very confident that we will be able to close as long as we get these conditions done. The buyer's agent is in contact with the listing agent who says that the seller is still interested in moving forward. So hopefully we've got an agreeable situation going forward. Good news is that your agent negotiated credits in your offer, keeping money in your pocket. So instead of spending money on closing costs, now you're going to spend a lesser amount, hopefully, on this wood repair. And when you get the house, the wood's going to be repaired, so you don't have to worry about getting that done. You can get straight into living in it and enjoying it, and move in. So that's the wood destroying, and that's the appraiser. Here's the thing: when I put in my offers for VA buyers, this is California. This exact scenario is in another state, on the other side of the country somewhere. But here I always put in that the seller is willing and able to pay for the wood destroying organisms. I don't usually put in anything about conditions from the appraiser. Those are usually negotiable items. In this scenario, because it was communicated between the buyer and the seller side that the credits were in lieu of any repairs, it sounds to me like there's already kind of a verbal agreement, if not in writing maybe, that the buyer is to take on these repairs if they want to move forward. So that's that, and you've got to do it in your upfront in your offer. So in this scenario, I might have, and maybe moving forward, we should just go ahead and put it in our offer that we saw that this, and this were deficiencies from visual, right? We're willing to accept it unless the appraiser calls it out or the WDOs call it out. WDO being wood destroying pest and organism inspectors. So we just want to make sure that we're covering our bases here. In this exact scenario, I don't think anybody's getting ripped off. I don't think anybody's getting, abused. Unfortunately, we have appraisers every once in a while that take this note of like, I'm going to protect the veteran. And they what they don't calculate into this protection of the veteran is that they're really getting in the way of the transaction. And then on top of that, there's this small little piece of me down here on my shoulder, a little Jiminy Cricket, if you will, telling me, yeah, the appraisers, there's less houses selling, right? Where there's 4 million houses selling per year now, where it used to be 6 or 7 million houses, nationwide. He's got less work to do. So anytime he can find anything to make him have to do a reinspection, those reinspections cost $200, which means that appraiser is making a little bit more money on this case. So if anybody's to blame here, as in like calling stuff out that's not necessarily needed to happen, I would look towards the appraiser. When it comes to the lender involved, I've worked with this lender hundreds of transactions, and I'm telling you, he's just doing his job, right? He puts in the order for the appraiser. We're not allowed to choose the appraiser and who it is. We get what we get when we get that appraisal, when we draw that appraiser. This appraiser put the conditions. They want that reinspection, or they want the money from the reinspection, maybe. But yeah, it's not the lender. The buyer's agent could have possibly thought to put an addendum together that would say, we notice these deficiencies. If they are called out, then the seller is going to take care of them. I don't know that the seller would have agreed to those terms, so we can't even put any shade on the buyer's agent. And with the listing agent, they're doing their best for their seller. It sounds like we're in a really good contract here, and we should see it through. It's just kind of a bummer that we have a buyer that's going to be paying for work on a seller's house. There is a little blurb in the VA loan guidelines that say that the buyer is not allowed to pay for the WDO inspections, but they are allowed to pay. The VA buyer is allowed to pay for the repairs. So there's nothing stopping that from happening. Also, if you look at the appraised amount, I haven't seen the appraised amount, but if you look at the appraised amount, if the appraised amount is higher than what the agreed purchase price is, then maybe there's a possibility that you up the purchase price by, whatever the cost of the wood stuff is, and have the seller go ahead and pay it. Another way forward is to find a contractor that is more than willing to get paid at the close of escrow, and have the escrow company, or lawyer or title company, whoever it is that handles the money in that state, have them write the check to the contracting company. That's kind of a normal situation that's easy to get approved with the WDO companies, but not your normal run-of-the-mill contractor. Normal run-of-the-mill contractors need the money up front, and most of the money up front, maybe half or 60 or 70%, and then they'll get their last 20, 30, 40, 50% at the finish of the work. But they're certainly not going to wait for the transaction to end. So I would approach the WDO company that did the original inspection and say, hey, what does it look like for you to do this work to get this done? And then have the appraiser come in and do the reinspection, and then the WDO company is agreeing to get paid at the close of escrow. That to me would be like the best scenario, especially if you can get the seller to sign an addendum saying that if this were to go this way and for some reason the sale does not finish, that the seller would be more than happy to pay the WDO company for doing that work, because if the deal unwinds, it still is that seller's house.